Greetings, Mr. Radoswich.
Yeah.
Greetings to everybody. Thank you for joining a second time.
Yeah.
And my apologies in case I mispronounced your name.
That happens to everyone.
But please do tell us what is the correct pronunciation.
It's not
of your
so
surname?
easy, this name.
The correct pronunciation is Radostic. It's actually it's a typical Austrian name because it's Croatian, but it's spelled in Hungarian, so it comes from Burgenland.
Yeah, it's from Burgenland. Isn't it a mixture of Croatian and Hungarian?
It's a Hungarian, it's a Croatian name, but it's spelled in Hungarian.
It's majorized. Yeah.
Exactly, yes.
Thank you for doing the job to make this remake. And we know that no remake is the same situation, the same as a remake before. So thank you very much. I think it was necessary to do that. Yeah.
In a way, we hope that it's not the same. So
would it be okay if I make a reference to this cyber attack in my presentation today? Because
I think that's by all means, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, because it only underscores the relevance, the need, and the significance of Holocaust remembrance. When we have cyber attacks, even on events that aim at commemorating the Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Absolutely. Okay, Munish, we're in your hands when to start. No?
I'll request for 2 minutes more.
Okay.
And then we start. Good evening, everyone. Before we start the program, there is a small montage which we have made, our technical team, so we start with it. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, our august panelists who are sitting there. Good evening, Mr. Matthias Radostech. And on behalf of Her Excellency, Mrs. Katrina Wieser, I would like to thank each and everybody who have joined us once again to this particular session, which was sort of sabotaged last time, showing the solidarity, and at the same time showing that yes, no matter what happens, but there is always a strong solidarity among all of us. Before we move further, I have with us the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Austrian Embassy, Mr. Matthias Radostech, whom I would like to request to kindly say the opening words. Mr. Radostic, please do the honors.
Thank you. Thank you, Munish. Thank you for all the participants, and in particular, a big thank you to all of us who join us a second time. We have with us three very distinguished professors, which is Professor Müller-Funk from the University of Vienna in Austria, which is Professor Afridi from Kolkata, and which is Professor Pushpeshpant, who is also a very long time friend of the Austrian Embassy. Thanks for joining. We are doing this event a bit long after the Holocaust Remembrance Day. Most of you who join us and will probably know that last time when we did it 2 weeks ago, we got cyber attacked, we got sabotaged, and we unfortunately had to stop the event. The idea at the last event was to allow live participation of audience via Zoom. We wanted to have an interaction with the audience afterwards, giving room for questions, giving room for discussions. But at the same time, because it was a very open event, this obviously gave the opportunity to some people then also to sabotage it, and we had to stop it. So this time we are repeating it. There was not, we didn't hesitate very long to decide on a repetition of this event, because we thought it's important not to give in and to try it again, because it is a very important day. It is a very important example of not giving in to this thoughts and to this extreme right. And we wanted to send an example, and we wanted to show that we are not intimidated by what happened last time, even though we had received quite some very disturbing images, I would say. I watched the recording afterwards, so some of the images were very disturbing and very threatening that we received, but we don't give in. We do it a second time because we feel that it is absolutely important. Unfortunately, we had to change the format a bit. Today, we cannot allow live discussion with the audience, which is a bit deplorable, because we think that particularly here in India, sometimes the Holocaust and what happened there and the atrocities that happened there are not known probably in a way that they should be known. But in order to hopefully conduct an event without disturbance, we had to take these measures. So with this, I'm again very happy that all of you also agreed to participate a second time. And I would hand over to Munish again. And please, Munish, take us through the program. And I think we can start with the first presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Radostic. Thanks a lot. And before I take through the presentation, I have a very renowned professor sitting with us, among us, whom we have requested to moderate the session, a friend philosopher guide, Dr. Professor Pushpeshpant, a well-known personality. Sir, would you like to say a few words before we continue with the session?
I thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity. I don't think I'm the best person to moderate, because as Mr. Matthias pointed out, in this country, there is a memory which is rather weak about Holocaust. I think it is not quite correct. It is a bit of a generational problem. When I was growing up, I remember very much as an adolescent reading Diary of Anne Frank. I remember very much a film which was Trial at Nuremberg. I remember very well since then, as I grew up watching Schindler's List, watching very recently The Boy in Striped Pajamas. And it is not as if Indians did not know what Holocaust was. But I think slowly, and I think the major reason for this has been that right when the world, Europe was waking up to the horrors of Auschwitz and Buchenwald and such like things, we in India were living the horrors of another kind of a genocide, the communal rioting post-partition. So we had this horror to live through. And ever since, we have tried to block this part of our mind, as some people at the moment seem to block their mind about Holocaust, which the victims, the Jews, suffered. And I recall the last time when we were having this discussion, Professor Dr. Müller-Funk had very vividly drawn a picture that how the Jews had suffered from victimization, had been forced to ghettoize, and how they had been demonized for centuries. So it was a culmination of something which had in Nazi Germany. But what happened in Nazi Germany is unforgivable. It's unforgettable. One might have political partisanships, sympathies with Palestinians, sympathies with Arabs, and worry about what Israel has since. But India has had a very close relationship with Israel because we also go back to, what they have done to Yiddish language, how they have revived their past, how they have relived their past, and how they have gone back. So I think it is good that we are discussing this today, but the present generation of Indians has a problem. They know only Israel as a friend of India, Israel with whom we have close ties, and they have forgotten there was a time in Indian history when I recall my passport had stamps, travel, not valid for travel to South Africa, Israel, and Portugal. So we have traveled a long distance since then. And I think I'm very, very happy that the Austrian embassy is doing this Holocaust Remembrance Day commemoration. I think it is not a day which has to be commemorated. It is the event which should never be forgotten and which should not be allowed to escape. There should be a remembrance every day with a deep breath and recalling the heroism of people who lived through this and survived. And those who did not survive deserve our commemoration all the years. So I don't have more to add with this. We'll pick it up as we do. I would request Professor Müller-Funk to kindly make his presentation.
Kindly allow me, Professor Müller-Funk, that before you continue, I'd say a bit about your background.
Yes.
And so that, we are able to inform others that we are with a very eminent personality with us. Professor Dr. Wolfgang Müller-Funk is a renowned professor for cultural studies at the Department of European and Comparative Linguistics and Literature at the University of Vienna and research coordinator at the School Faculty for Philology and Cultural Studies. His main areas of research: essayism, 20th century avant-garde, cultural theory, romanticism, Austrian literary and cultural history. He has held positions as lecturer at the University of Munich, assistant professor at the University of Klagenfurt, Innsbruck, a professor for German cultural studies at the University of Birmingham, and as the director of the Waldviertel Academy in Austria. He was a visiting professor at the University of Szeged in Hungary, at the Hochschule for Fernsehen and Film, Munich, at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and the University of Mumbai. Since 2019, he is also a fellow member of the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. Professor Müller-Funk, thank you very much for agreeing, for giving your discourse once again. And it is a sort of, as I said in the beginning, before we started the session, that it is like icing on the cake, that, you know, that sabotage, even though it happened, gave us an opportunity to listen once again to you. Over to you, Professor Müller-Fong.
Thank you very much, Professor Baal, and thank you for your important introduction, Professor Pant. I think the Indian context is also very interesting for me, and I always would like to greet the Vice Ambassador of Israel, if she's come already. Hello. And I have to say many thanks that you repeat this important meeting. I know diplomats are smooth and calm and quiet persons, but sometimes it is necessary to push back. And I think we had to push back to the cyber attack and try in a very cautious form to make our important meeting. So I start with my points. The panelists know it, but maybe it's a repetition. It's also good for reminding. My first point is anti-Semitism, a long history. For centuries, the Christian minority has been seen in the Roman Empire as a part of the Jewish world. The differences between seem to be compared with the ancient polytheistic pantheon very little. One difference was that the Christian communities did not only recruit themselves from traditional Jewry, but were open for all ethnic groups within the Roman Empire. The Christian message was directed to all human beings, not only to the Jewish community. It was universal. Christian and Jewish people, however, had in common that their religion was monotheistic and included a messianic narrative plot. The main difference was that the traditional Jews believed that the Messiah has not yet come, whereas the Christian group believed that their central figure, Jesus Christ, was the Messiah that has been promised the people by God's prophets. The Christian groups denied some traditional rites of the Jewish religion, for example, the circumcision. Both groups lived under permanent threat of being persecuted by the Roman state. This situation changed dramatically when Christianity became the official religion in the 4th century after Christ. Now the Jewish people became subjects of a Christian ruler, living very often in specific settlements and called ghettos. They were places of reclusion between persecution and protection. Second point, typology of anti-Semitism. Roughly speaking, very roughly speaking, but I have only 15 minutes, one can distinguish 3 forms of anti-Semitism in the Occidental world: a religious and theological one, a socio-economic one, and a racist one. The religious attacks against Jews are the oldest version of anti-Semitism. Here the Jews are seen as enemies of Jesus Christ, who are responsible for his crucifixion. In summary, they deny to become Christians. They are seen not only metaphorically as well poisonous, as it was the case in the times of the Black Plague in the Middle Ages, epidemic, I think an actual point. As René Girard, a French philosopher, has pointed out, the Jews became the scapegoat of societies that were threatened by a terrible and deadly epidemic situation. Between 1348 and 1351, thousands of Jewish people have been burned in French and German cities, especially by citizens and guilds. If they were not killed, they were expelled and harassed. The social suspicion against successful entrepreneurs and bankers falls together with a rising of modern capitalism at first in the Italian republics of 15th and 16th centuries, in which credit and loan played an enormous role. Some people from Jewish communities, but not only from them, became modern rich men. This was the stereotype of the greedy Jew saw light of days that culminated in the 19th century in a conspiracy narrative. The most famous book, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, tells that a handful of powerful and sinister Jews meet at the Jewish cemetery in Prague, discussing how to rule and manipulate the world. Although this book proved to be a fake, millions of people believe until today that the protocols are pure truth. I remember I saw a copy of this book next to Hitler's book Mein Kampf, in which the protocols are quite clearly quoted, in 2005 in a street shop in Mumbai. That was my first visit in your country. It is central for the apocalyptic narrative of National Socialism, in which the German Aryans of the Third Reich fight against the powers of darkness in a last battle. In this delusional ideology, all what is seen as dark is Jewish American capitalism as Russian Bolshevism. The third type of anti-Semitism goes hand in hand with a popular biologist discourse in which race becomes a central category. Following the racist argument, every person belongs to such a race, and this race determines the behavior, the intelligence, and the qualities of an ethnic group. This racism that is hostile to universalism and the age of enlightenment is connected with the idea of homogeneous nations in which there is, in the eyes of an ardent nationalist and racist, there is no place for any foreign race such as Jews. Third, after Auschwitz. Auschwitz is the name and a metonym for the mass murder of about 6 million innocent people, the overwhelming majority Jews. The Nazis also killed homosexuals, Roma, political enemies, and disabled persons. After the political and the military breakdown and the moral breakdown, nobody from the beaten regime wanted to take responsibility for this unbelievable collective crime. But for the first time in history, the representatives of the regime were charged for their crimes they had ordered. Also, they denied any complicity. A lot of people in Germany demonstrated against the trial of Nuremberg. Following Sigmund Freud, they missed the lost love object, the leader, den Führer der Deutschen, as Alexander Mitscherlich wrote in his famous book, Die Unfähigkeit zu trauern, the inability of mourning. They did not mourn for the killed Jews, but for the lost war and the destroyed cities. Partially, it was sympathy for the old regime too. Partially, they did not want to believe what have happened in the 12 years of the Third Reich, although the deportation and annihilation of the Jewish people in the German lands, and especially in the eastern part of Europe, has been an explicit part of the program of the party. And the last reason for denial, Nietzsche has described in a famous aphorism on remembering. Quotation, I must have done that, says a memory. I cannot have done that, there's a pride. At the end, the pride will win. But what was new was the fact that the new democratic elite in the Federal Republic of Germany, not in the GDR and at the very beginning, not in Austria, took responsibility for the crimes of the Nazi dictatorship morally and jurisdically, including process of reconciliation with the new state of Israel. This was also not very popular in post-war Germany in the 1950s. The foundation of the United Nations and the Declaration of Human Rights can be seen as an immediate reaction of the traumatic events of Second World War and Auschwitz, and of the end of the colonialism. It must also be seen as a response on the end of colonialism and its crime. Also, it is quite evident that the power constellation in these institutions, for example, in the Security Council in the United Nations, is not really fair. All this can be seen as an important step, a rupture with traditional nationalism. Nationalism is not an outcome of a nation, but as Ernest Gellner, a Jewish Czech Austrian researcher, has pointed out, it is nationalism that creates the old and at the same time young nation, which can be seen as a collective narcissism based on the simple statement, right or wrong, it is my country. In this nationalistic attitude, only the successful and long story of a nation is relevant, and every critique is seen as a nest soiling. The critical debate on Auschwitz, which took place on different levels, especially since the 1960s, had from the very beginning a transnational aspect. Firstly, because it tried to overcome the traditional national perspective, and secondly, because it gives the events during the Third Reich, World War II, and the Shoah a transnational meaning. In Robert Menasse's novel, The Capital, Die Hauptstadt, an Austrian academic makes a proposal to declare Auschwitz to the capital of the European Union instead of Brussels. That might be seen as a rhetoric statement, but it makes clear inasmuch these events are relevant as a 0 point of human history that creates ex negative, from the negative perspective, the utopia of a soft, empathic, and peaceful world after Auschwitz. It resembles a little bit Benjamin's angel of history, who is driven into the future by the catastrophes of the past. It was a TV series, Holocaust, and the ambitious film of Claude Lanzmann, Shoah, and it was a new generation in Germany and later in Austria that supported a self-critical perspective. In modern societies, cultural change goes always hand in hand with a conflict between generations. In this case, it burdened the older generation, which had spent its youth in the Third Reich, and which was now confronted with the accusation of complicity or even with a German collective guilt. My fourth point, Austria. For a long time, 1938 occupied Austria could live very comfortable with the narrative of the innocent victim of National Socialism. It was part of the program of a new attempt of Austrian nation building beyond a project of a union with Germany that was compromised after the Third Reich. And it was to some extent true, as only the Mexican government argued in 1938 explicitly, the so-called Anschluss was neither a legal nor a peaceful act. In those times, Austria had an authoritarian regime that was backed by Mussolini, the Italian leader. The National Socialists in Austria had never won any election in this country, and the party was forbidden after the successful assassination attempt on Austria's dictator, Dollfuss. Leaders from the Social Democrats and the Christian Conservatives were arrested in the concentration camp of Dachau. But it was also clear that there were a lot of sympathizers and supporters of the regime of a man who declared that he has brought his homeland Austria into the Großdeutsche Reich. Moreover, many Austrians were part of the destruction machinery of the National Socialist system. The case of the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kurt Waldheim, who was in World War II officer in the German Wehrmacht at the Balkans, deconstructed the comfortable narrative of innocence. Waldheim could probably not be proven personally guilty of the crimes of the Wehrmacht, but his nationalistic and dogmatic attitude had a double consequence. On the one hand, he won the presidential elections because many of his compatriots liked the story of the innocent, small, and occupied country. He always repeated. But the debate around his person and his behavior encouraged the other political camp, the young generation, to give the Austrian co-responsibility, a diplomatic format. In occupied Austria, 1938 to 1945, there were victims and culprits. With this new narrative in his symbolic luggage, a new chancellor, the Social Democrat Franz Warnicki, visited Israel, opening the door for a new relation between our country and our neighbors in Israel. Austria was not the only, but probably the most significant example for the fact that Hitler's regime has armies in nearly all European countries, occupied or not, that helped him in the Endlösung der Judenfrage. My fifth point, 3 generations after Auschwitz. Memory as an instrument of politics. In my book, The Architecture of Modern Culture, Towards a Narrative Cultural Theory, I have argued that remembering and narrating are deeply connected with each other. The act of reminding is unthinkable without telling a story. And a narrative is never a copy of a reality, but also its interpretation. Holocaust, for example, has a connotation of a sacrifice. You see the Jewish people in Germany or in Austria as your former neighbors, whereas Shoah refers to the catastrophe and to the complete disappearing what has happened. In his film, one does not see what has happened, only the green, innocent landscape. What you hear are voices, the voices of victims, of culprits, of witnesses. And it makes also a difference if the audience is Israeli, Jewish, American, German, Austrian, French, or Indian. At the moment, I refer here to an article from Bert Rebhandel in the Viennese left liberal broadsheet, Der Standard, dealing with books of Dirk Moses and Jürgen Zimmerer. There's a new debate about the uniqueness of the Shoah. At first glance, it is evident that the Shoah is unique, but this is the case in all criminal cases, post-colonial, colonial, Stalinist, post-Stalinist, terrorist, etc. On the one hand, we know we should be careful with analogies, but on the other hand, all these crimes fit together in an irritating panorama of cruelty and violence. Cruelty, by the way, is the topic of my last book that will be published in 2 days in Germany. They have, this is my hypothesis, similar causes and backgrounds. There is an economy and moreover a perverse ethics of cruelty that suggests to extinct other irritating strange people. But it is also true that some analogies are unacceptable, analytically and morally. It is an interesting fact that, for example, some intellectuals from the left camp in Germany and Austria are very keen reminding the Holocaust, but at the same time, they formulate fundamental reservations about the state of Israel as a post-colonial power because of its conflict with the Palestinian people, who are seen, at least metaphorically, as a new sense. This is, in my view, nonsense. Also, one can argue, and I saw yesterday a very interesting film, Israeli film called The Lemon Tree, about the conflict. Yeah? There are problems and there are critical points, but it is nonsense to identify the Palestine as the new Jews. It might be difficult, but it's not illegitimate to criticize a concrete decision of an Israeli government. Moreover, that may be also an act of solidarity in a fight for a world that tried to overcome the logic of sacrificing in the sense of Benjamin. It is a derision of the real victims of the world history, but it is a derision of the real victim of world history if young people in Austria and Germany who do not want to be vaccinated against Corona compare themselves with Anne Frank or the life in a Nazi camp or have David stars on their jackets during the demonstration. Reminding and forgetting fit together. We remember things because we have forgotten them, and we forget because we have remembered. The fear that we might forget Auschwitz is understandable but unrealistic. What is true is that most of the people suffering from the Shoah are no longer among the living. What Maurice Halbwachs, the French Jewish sociologist, has called the social remembering of the three generations has come to an end. But it is quite clear that remembering, which is not a static, but a dynamic phenomenon, that remembering as such will not come to an end. It will become part of a history that remains irritating, but gives us energy for a better future. How later generation will tell and interpret the event between 1933, 1938 to 1945 is an open point. We cannot control how future generations will narrate Auschwitz. We are, however, responsible for the narrative we use to explain and to narrate the Shoah. And we are responsible how we make use from these narratives in the political conflict of our days. In my view, neither denial nor forgetting is a problem of our days. Maybe is to some extent is a commercialization of the Shoah in different media, including film, internet, and memorial sites. We are responsible for our credibility and the quality of our way of enlightenment. The temporal distance to the tragic and cruel events has grown, but distance need not be automatically problematic as such. It can also create a wider perspective and can sharpen the analytic view. The response on growing anti-Semitism must be more than the simple claim for more enlightenment. Some less might be more if it is convincing. This could be a point for our common discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor, for your absolutely stimulating, evocative presentation. And if I may just begin raising a few questions which you have stimulated in my mind. When you talk in terms of remembrance and reminding, the problem I feel is, how do you remember something which is not part of your individual recollection? It's a semi-philosophical question. If you are staying in Europe, if you have three-generational memory, as you said, you have been handed down familial memories, you recollect something which you learned in childhood is reinforced. Now, but what happens when you are not part of that cultural universe which has exposed Jews to centuries of anti-Semitism, which has witnessed firsthand the horrors of war, the destruction of war, and all the Freudian explanations about the leader having been lost, the love not being reciprocated? I have a problem which is slightly different. When you were enumerating the points about anti-Semitism, you very clearly made 3 or 4 ones. There is an economic dimension, there is a religious dimension, there is a racial dimension. To my mind, which do you think has been more influential in poisoning the anti-Semitism most? The success of the Jews in economic field, commercially, their great brain power, which seemed to make others feel puny. I remember Isaac Deutscher writing about the Jews as a marginal people who lived with their wits in a very hostile environment. They were great mathematicians, great musicians, great scientists, great bankers, great traders. And this is what made them the hated other, because they were brighter than you, they made you feel inferior. So that's one part of the thing. The success of the Jews, despite all odds stacked against them, seem to be a dimension in this anti-Semitism. The second one, which I feel, is that, you see, racially, now when we talk of the world today in the 21st century, it is not a world which is talking in terms of only the Semitic people, talking of the Europeans and the Arabs, is also is the Africans. It also is the Asiatics, is also the Chinese. Now, each one of them is carrying a burden of their past. Where does remembering Holocaust, do you remember, as I began in my original comments, and I would like you to respond to that, Professor, because you've been a friend of India, you have been with us in Delhi and Bombay, and you have made some of your similar discoveries about the protocols in a footpath bookshop in Bombay. What do you think? How do you think the Holocaust and the memories of the victimization of genocide of the Jews, how does one become aware of it? And I'm sorry, it's a long-winded question, but the two are related. You yourself mentioned to films, the works of literature, novels, etc. They enrich our understanding of an event in the past. But then in the process, it becomes a vicarious experience. It leads to a catharsis, like a safety valve, which absolves me in India from knowing a little more. I think, I have read the novel, I have seen the film, and it has also diluted the tragedy for me, if I may say so, to a certain extent. So these are the two twin problems which I have.
Can you repeat the question as such once again, please? Because it was very long.
How does one recollect something which is not part of one's own individual memory or recollection or handed down familial memory or a shared, shall we say, abused word, national memory, racial memory, whatever you call it? That's one. The second is that when related to this is when this can I recollect something first because becoming aware of it, and how do I become aware of it? So doesn't it become some kind of a vicarious construct that somebody is reminding me something which I can't recollect on my own?
Yeah. I think there's a difference. I mentioned Maurice Halbwachs, and Maurice Halbwachs quite clearly referred to that kind of living memory that is part of a family during at least three generations. Yeah, that is the active and personal reminding. In my view, you don't believe?
I agree. I agree. My problem is that even in Europe, the three generational cycle is over. So how do we get back elsewhere other than Europe, where the problem is one layer more complicated?
Yeah, it is absolutely complicated, and we have come at a point where this kind of direct family-based memory has come to an end. And in the perspective of Maurice Halbwachs, we now in the situation that that is now part of a collective history. Yeah. In a fortnight, I will become a grandfather of a small child, and she will not have any direct remembering of the concrete stories what has happened in Vienna, for example, in 1938. I know that because of my mother who lived there. Yeah. So the situation changed also in all European countries and also in Israel, yeah, because of that statement. And that was an argument with a distance, and that I dare say that there will be more and more other narrative issues. The situation of the non-European is completely different. I agree with that. Yeah. There could be analogies because India has a small minority called the Parsi in Mumbai, for example. But the story is completely different. It didn't happen a collective murder on this tiny and successful minority. It's quite clear that. At first glance, the Holocaust, the Shoah, is not a story of the Indian collective memory. Yeah, this is quite clear. But as I argued, the Shoah is exemplary in that kind that for the first time, crimes of official politician has discussed, and they were punished. And we have now in the format of human rights a common format, yeah. And so we can argue, yeah, that for Indians the Shoah and the Holocaust is not a part of this national and transnational cultural heritage, but it's relevant if you see the position of India in a global world that is framed by an institution as the United Nations. So the Shoah obliged us, not only in Europe, not only in Germany, not only in Austria, to remember what has happened, but make a relevant contribution to human rights and a critical engagement against any similar possibilities of collective cruelty. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor. That was very enlightening.
Very general answer.
A general answer to a very general question. I'm very grateful for it.
Depends on the...
I would request Professor Navras Afridi to make his presentation, which was abruptly interrupted last time when there was a cyber attack, Zoom bombing. And perhaps we can take some more questions towards the end amongst ourselves and the Israeli Vice Ambassador. So may I request, or Munish would like to introduce him once again, and then we do that, or I'm game.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor Pant. So Professor Pant.
Yes,
just give me a minute, Professor Afridi.
would reintroduce you.
And I would like to reintroduce you. Thank you very much. Professor Afridi is an assistant professor of history at Presidency University, Calcutta, where he teaches courses in Jews history, genocide studies, interfaith relations, and minority studies. His publications include a monograph, Judaism movements and traditions of Israelite descent in South Asia. It's published in New Delhi by Pragati Publications in 2016. An edited collection with Priya Singh. So kindly correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Afridi. And conceptualizing mass violence, representations, collections, and reinterpretations, several papers in peer-reviewed journals and chapters in edited books published by prestigious international publishing houses. He has held visiting fellowship at the universities of Tenerife and Sydney and Wolf Institute, Cambridge, UK, and been a scholar in residence at St. John's College, Oxford, for an ISGAP Summer Institute. He is also a fellow of that brings him close to Austria. Again, he is also a fellow of the Salzburg Global Seminar, Holocaust Education and Genocide Prevention Program, and is currently a research fellow at the Institute of Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy in New York. May I request you, Professor Afridi, to kindly take on the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Professor Mueller-Funk, Professor Pant, Mr. Radoswich, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We have gathered online today to commemorate the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. There are several functions that memorialization and remembrance serve, some of which identified by Judy Barslow and Victoria Baxter are the following. 1, truth-telling or documenting specific human rights violations. 2, creating a specific place or occasion for the society to mourn victims. 3, offering symbolic reparations to honor the victims of violence. 4, symbolizing a community's or nation's commitment to values such as democracy and human rights. 5, promoting reconciliation by recasting the national identity or repairing damaged relations among groups. 6, encouraging civic engagement and education programs to engage the wider community in a dialogue about the past and promote discussions of a peaceful future based on coexistence. 7, advancing educational purposes, including the retelling of history for future generations. And the last point, the 8th point, facilitating historic preservation of a specific era in a country's or community's history. The International Holocaust Remembrance Day is commemorated to mark the anniversary of the liberation of the concentration camps at Auschwitz and Birkenau, and to honor the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust and millions of other victims of National Socialism, also known as Nazism. Another purpose of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day is to promote Holocaust education across the world. Since 2010, the United Nations has designated specific themes for the annual commemorations. The theme for this year is Memory, Dignity, and Justice, aimed at exploring how preservation of historical record and combating its distortion are elements of claimed justice. This is what I will focus on in my talk. It was an exclusionary and genocidal ideology that perpetrated the Holocaust. It was the same ideology in a different avatar that killed Mahatma Gandhi. Assassination of Mahatma Gandhi was not merely the murder of an individual, but an attempt to eliminate tolerance and ensure the triumph of exclusivism over inclusivism. Neither the perpetrators of the Holocaust nor the killers of Gandhi succeeded in achieving their objectives. Hence, both of them are engaged since then in distorting history, which is what makes memory the first of the three elements of the theme of this year's Holocaust Remembrance Day such a contested field. This assault on memory and distortion of history has varied manifestations. While the killers of Mahatma Gandhi and their apologists try to justify his murder through an anti-Gandhi narrative built on baseless arguments, the Nazi sympathizers, apologists, and anti-Semites resort to the denial, minimization, trivialization, and obfuscation of the Holocaust. We just cannot afford to be complicit, for it would only worsen the situation, particularly here in India, given how the rise in Hitler's popularity in India is inversely proportional to the decline in Gandhi's. It is worth noting that when Nathuram Godse assassinated Mahatma Gandhi, he assumed that a significant section of Hindus and Sikhs, particularly refugees, would rise in his support just the way the public had compelled the British to bow to their pressure at the time of the trial of the captured soldiers of the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose-led Indian National Army, which had fought the British Army during the Second World War. On the contrary, the public mood swung against Godse in a massive and violent storm of revulsion, as described by Godse's biographer, Dhirendra Kumar Jha. However, 74 years later, on Mahatma Gandhi's birth anniversary last year, 2021, hashtag Nathuram Godse Zindabad, that is, long live Nathuram Godse, was one of the top trends on Twitter for several hours. More than a dozen statues of Nathuram Godse, Mahatma Gandhi's assassin, have been erected across the country. The New York Times reported on 4th February 2020 that several Hindu temples are being converted into temples dedicated to Godse. The New York Times mentioned in the same report that the government of Uttar Pradesh, India's most populous state, proposed changing the name of Meerut, a city of 1.57 million, to Godse City. There has been an enactment of Mahatma Gandhi's assassination to great cheer, and several attacks on his memorials, defacement of his pictures, and decapitation of a statue of his. The rise in the popularity of Nathuram Godse, Mahatma Gandhi's assassin, parallels that of Adolf Hitler, one who led the perpetration of the Holocaust. Between 1999 and 2004, some 43% of Indians supported rule by a strong leader. This figure rose to 56% between 2010 and 2014. Recent surveys have found Indians to be the most ardent supporters of autocratic rule. However, the strange phenomenon of Hitler's popularity in India cannot be dismissed simply as an obsession with and a craving for strong leadership. We should all be alarmed if the world's most populous democracy, home to 1/6 of humankind, with the largest diaspora in the world, comes to admire Hitler more than any other non-Indian leader and is hardly aware of the Holocaust. The few who are not ignorant of the Holocaust often condone it, for they consider it unnecessary collateral damage for the greater good of the German nation, or the only wrongdoing by Hitler. The fact that Hitler is gaining popularity in a country where anti-Semitism remains largely unknown even today, except for only certain sections of its population, is paradoxical. It is symptomatic of a lot that is wrong with our society today, and if we ignore it, we do so at our own peril. The sales of Mein Kampf in India have increased to the tune of 15% in just a decade. Free of copyright in India, Mein Kampf is printed by half a dozen publishers. Hundreds of thousands of its copies have been sold in the last 2 decades, and a steady rise in its demand has been registered. Hitler's popularity is not confined to his autobiography. All of his memorabilia sell like hotcakes. There have also been a number of films named after Hitler in India's various languages. The films, except Gandhi to Hitler, released in 2011, neither are biopics on Hitler nor depict Hitler as a character. It is just that in all of these films, the lovable protagonist, because of his authoritarian nature, is called Hitler. Given how ignorant Indians generally are of the Holocaust, it seems appropriate to them to call anyone who comes across as too bossy Hitler. An important example is the popular Hindi daily soap opera Hitler Didi. Didi in Hindi is a respectful form of address for elder sister. Its 448 episodes were broadcast from 2011 to 2013 on the Hindi satellite television channel ZTV and is currently available on the OTT platform Z5. It is the protagonist, a girl in Delhi, burdened with the responsibility of providing for a family as the sole breadwinner, who has been called Hitler, just because of her being a strict disciplinarian. According to the TRP ratings, it was the 4th most popular show in India. It was later broadcast also in Pakistan, the fountainhead of Urdu anti-Semitic rhetoric, and its dubbed Farsi version in Iran, notorious for holding Holocaust cartoon contests and Holocaust denial conferences. In North America and Europe, it was aired with the title General Didi instead of the original title because of the Anti-Defamation League's objection to the use of Hitler in the title. However, the objection was overlooked by Z Entertainment Enterprises when its Arabic version was broadcast to the Arab world on Z Alwan, a Dubai-based satellite television channel from December 17, 2014, under the title Achti Hitler. The Anti-Defamation League expressed its disappointment with the return of Adolf Hitler's name in the title in a statement it posted on its website within a fortnight of that. Wayne Anderson aptly demonstrated the key role television plays in shaping our perceptions when he reported in an op-ed he published in the New York Times in 1996 that half of his astronomy students at Sacramento City College believed that there was a government conspiracy to conceal UFOs and cited television programs as evidence. Holocaust scholar Alvin Rosenfeld rightly points out that, quote, Hitler has become an allegorical as well as an historical figure, a presence that summons the attention of this generation and undoubtedly will continue to be a compelling presence for years to come. While remains a threatening figure on one level, on another, he is undergoing a figurative process of domestication and normalization, which has the effect of disconnecting him from the criminal regime he established and the catastrophes he wrought, unquote. He adds that, quotation marks open, the historian's role is and will remain crucial to uncovering the past. Yet historical memory broadly conceived may depend less on the records of events drawn up by scholars than on the projection of these events by writers, filmmakers, artists, and others. Unquote. Indians and Pakistanis with the first name Hitler have a strong presence on the social networking site Facebook. They are generally those who associate aggression with masculinity and perceive it as a virtue. Their Facebook posts generally betray their right-wing leanings. Some of them cannot even spell the name Hitler correctly, but it is not enough to keep them from using it for themselves on social media. So strong is their admiration for him. Rosenfeld explains the strange phenomenon of Hitler's popularity in the following words. Quote, such a figure who seems to be able to satisfy at one and the same time our fantasies for power, madness, money, sex, murder, politics, pageantry, ambition, and art obviously has appeal. It is not an appeal that will help us better understand the Nazi persecution and slaughter of the Jews, but then it is not meant to. Rather, it is meant to fascinate us with the Holocaust, to some degree, even to entertain us with it, and ultimately to distract us from it by turning it into something else, a source of vicarious danger and excitement, a new mythology of sometimes pleasurable, sometimes violent sensations, unquote. Perhaps the genesis of Hitler's popularity in South Asia can be traced to the Nazi propaganda in the region. Nazi propagandists were active in India from 1933 to 1939. Newspapers such as Spirit of the Times, Salare Hind, Princely India, Karnatak Bandhu, Lokhandi Morcha, and Trikal carried direct Nazi propaganda. The propagandists tried to influence both the Hindus and the Muslims. They raised the issue of Palestine to win Muslim support. To win Hindu support, they highlighted the Nazi symbol of the swastika and the Aryan race theory because they were aware that the swastika is an ancient Hindu symbol and the North Indians consider themselves Aryan. They also tried to impress upon them that India belonged to them alone and not to the Muslims, and other communities such as Germany belonged only to Germans and not to the Jews, who were outsiders. The Nazis operated in India through various cultural and business organizations, both Indian and European. There is little proper awareness of the Holocaust in South Asia. The word Holocaust is often used loosely to refer to just any episode of mob violence without taking into account its magnitude and scale and whether or not the violence was targeted against a particular group of people with the intention of completely or partially annihilating them. The term Holocaust was originally used exclusively for the Nazi genocide of the Jews, but later when it came to be used for other genocides as well, some people, including Elie Wiesel, advocated the use of an alternative term for it, Shoah. However, in India, the term Holocaust is often used even for episodes of mass violence that cannot qualify as genocides should we adopt its United Nations definition. Given the lack of proper knowledge of the Holocaust, terms associated with the Holocaust are used loosely more often than not. An example is that whenever the pollution levels in any Indian city cross a certain level, the press starts reporting that the city has turned into a virtual gas chamber. It was primarily from the 2,000 European Jews who found refuge in India that Indians, including the Jews among them, learned about the Holocaust, and not from the press in India, which was at that time focused on reporting the struggle for national independence from the British and gave little space to news of the then ongoing Holocaust. It is hard to find a book on the Holocaust in any Indian language, while the autobiography of Hitler and his biographies are omnipresent in almost every major Indian language for as little as less than $1. The Holocaust is seldom more than a mere passing reference, if it even figures at all, in the history syllabus at the secondary level of education in India. Eminent Holocaust scholar Dina Porat underscores the need for the education of Jewish history in general, and not just Holocaust education, to make the students completely understand why the colossal tragedy took place and not just how. To quote her, Holocaust education has also not yet proved itself to be a barrier against anti-Semitism. For youngsters whose ignorance is coupled by naivete, often raise questions such as these. Why the Jews? Why all the Jews? What's wrong with them? Was their murder really initiated without any logical reason or other good motive? 6 million. How indeed did so many Jews who do not seem to be helpless today allow this to be done to them? Unquote. Only education in Jewish history can answer such questions, hence so badly needed. Robert Wistrich cautioned us that ignorance about Judaism and Jewish history is, of course, a particularly fertile breeding ground for anti-Semitism. And in 2004, the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan rightly said that the rise of anti-Semitism anywhere is a threat to people everywhere. Thus, in fighting anti-Semitism, we fight for the future of all humanity. Widespread ignorance of the Holocaust and the Jewish history makes people susceptible to anti-Semitic propaganda aimed at denying or minimizing or trivializing the Holocaust. National Socialism or Nazism finds mention in the Indian national curricula for school education and in the syllabus for the National Eligibility Test for Lectureships in History conducted by the University Grants Commission. But the mention of Holocaust is absent in both. Not all books mention Jews as the victims of Nazi rule. Even if the Holocaust finds a passing reference in a discussion of National Socialists, it is often de-Judaized, lest it be perceived as an unwarranted and unfair focus on the plight of just one particular section of victims, which included Jews, Gypsies, homosexuals, Slavs, etc. Transforming empirical Holocaust victims into a rhetorical figure is moreover unethical because it effaces the actual victimization experiences of real, non-metaphoric Jews, unquote, as Anne Roth puts it. According to the National Council for Educational Research and Training textbook for year 9 from 2006, Hitler's success indicates that he possessed specific personal qualities, even if used in a manipulative manner. These traits are presented by other books not merely as capabilities, but as positive qualities. A 2005 textbook for year 12, published by a private publishing house, Saraswati House, even strikes a tone of admiration. While the Nazi rule is validated in general, when it comes to the characterization of Hitler, the tone of the text varies from profound condemnation to appreciation and admiration. As far as the textbooks are concerned, Holocaust is rarely ever mentioned by name. The Nazi genocide against Jews is generally nothing more than a mere passing reference. Absence of the education of Jewish history and the Holocaust, compounded by the lack of credible sources of information on Jews in vernaculars, has led to widespread ignorance of who the Jews are and how they suffered during the Holocaust. The domestication, normalization, popularization, and commercialization of Hitler only aggravates the situation, leading to the justification of the perpetration of the Holocaust in public perception. This makes the ignorant masses particularly susceptible to the anti-minority propaganda unleashed by the right wing, inspired by Nazi and fascist ideologies. Together, these factors provide conditions conducive for anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and communalism to thrive in India. India is still not a member of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It is an international organization dedicated to raising Holocaust awareness and promoting its education. It funds the training of teachers in member countries for the launch of Holocaust education. Its members include several countries not affected by the Holocaust, including a number of countries from Asia. Yet India abstains from becoming its member. Although the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance has had Indian scholars participating in its annual conferences, there are lessons to be learned from the study of the Holocaust. A number of countries, such as Australia, South Africa, and the United States, geographically far away from Europe, where the Holocaust took place, have introduced Holocaust education in their curriculum. It is high time India followed suit. We need to make efforts to raise historical awareness via education as well as popular culture to combat the rising popularity of Hitler. We can hope that this would work as a deterrent to a certain degree to the several problems just mentioned and to the occurrence of mass violence. At the same time, we must be cautious of what Rosenfeld has pointed out. Quote, the very success of the Holocaust's wide dissemination in the public sphere can work to undermine its gravity and render it a more familiar thing. The more successfully it enters the cultural mainstream, the more commonplace it becomes. A less taxing version of a tragic history begins to emerge, still full of suffering to be sure, but a suffering relieved of many of its weightiest moral and intellectual demands, and consequently easier to bear. Made increasingly familiar through repetition, it becomes normalized, unquote. The following steps, if taken, could go a long way in creating awareness of the Holocaust in South Asia, so badly needed. 1. Launch of a training program in Holocaust education for secondary level teachers. 2. Introduction of Holocaust and mass violence studies at the secondary level of education through the incorporation of the subject in the syllabi of the various national boards of education. 3. Publication of books on the Holocaust for secondary level education in South Asian languages. 4. Establishment of faculty positions in Holocaust studies at primary institutions of higher education. 5. Translation of Holocaust literature and dubbing of Holocaust cinema into South Asian languages. 6. Establishment of Holocaust museums in major cities. And I was at the 6th or 7th point, I don't remember. And the last point is public commemoration of the International Holocaust Memorial Day. I have been trying to promote the study of global Jewish history, including the history of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, for more than a decade in India, with some degree of success. In 2016, Presidency University in Kolkata, one of the most prestigious institutions of higher education in India, launched courses in Holocaust studies and global Jewish history, the only such courses in the region. Relevant education at all levels can be a far more effective means of eliminating anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism than anything else, and that is what we should all strive to promote. Alvin Rosenfeld implores us to be conscious of the fact that, quote, the Nazi genocide of the Jews will not soon be forgotten, but how it is retained in memory and transmitted depends overwhelmingly on what we choose to recover from the past, on what we choose to ignore or suppress, and on what we choose to remodel or newly invent. Thank you.
Professor Pushpesh, your mic is muted.
Yes, I think I like to interfering, my dog barking, my barking. I think it was a wonderful presentation. I have just one simple question to you, sir. You euphemistically referred to the situation in India. How do you remember Holocaust when the ruling party and a cultural organization very closely allied to it worships Hitler? I mean, the RSS took its inspiration from Hitler. They have a semi-Nazi salute. They have the concept of racial purity and superiority. So do we have a hope of textbooks changing. You mentioned a textbook being brought out by a publisher, private publisher, Saraswati Prakashan. These are front organizations of what we in this country call the Sangh Parivar. My short question is, can you have a Holocaust museum in India, in any city, when the Museum of Partition, which was started in Amritsar, was an effort of some people to look back and see what crimes Hindus had committed against Muslims when the riots took place. The Muslims had killed Hindus, but the Hindus had killed Muslims. And I think the point which you made, which most excited me about your presentation, is that we must make a distinction between mass killings, riots, and genocides. Now, where does the scale of mass killings make it genocidal? The anti-Sikh riots in 1984, the Gujarat riots of 2002, are they not genocidal in intent? Are they not people being complicit by just keeping quiet? It is not only a question of deification of Hitler. It is the whole ideology. It is not that one individual with certain characteristic traits who could get away with this genocide. But we also have kept silent. Forget about partition. Take for instance, the Delhi riots just a couple of years back. I mean, you could say anti-Sikh riots were 3 decades back. Gujarat riots are 2 decades back. So you put distance between yourself and the time when these occurrences took place and forget about them. I would not expect you to answer immediately. I think we are running a little behind time. So may I request Her Excellency, the Deputy Ambassador of Israel, to chip in what she has to say. I think that would be what we are most waiting for. And then maybe we could have a quick summation. Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think she's muted.
We still can't hear her.
We can't. She's on the mute. I can see her on the mute.
Can you hear me now?
No, of course,
Yes.
correctly.
Okay. Someone was playing with my computer, and so it went to a different microphone. Anyway, thank you very much, Professor Pant, and thank you very much to both Professor Muller-Funk and Professor Afridi for two very, very interesting and enlightening talks. I had some notes before, but I'm afraid Professor Afridi took very much of what I wanted to say about the importance of education. And thank you for that, because you did it much more professionally and much more articulately than I probably could have. But I absolutely have to agree with several things that you said. The importance of IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Organization Alliance, is crucial for the maintenance of memory, if that's a correct phrase. It's their activities in so many different aspects of Holocaust remembrance, both in education and in memorialization, in various ceremonies, in the conferences that they have. It's very, very important work, and I've watched it grow over the past couple of decades that they've been working, and that I've been involved in as a diplomat in Holocaust remembrance. And it's really very, very important work, and that's why Israel is hoping to be president of IRA in 2025 for the next presidency, which will also mark 80 years to the end of the Holocaust. And that's something that's very important. We also, together with Germany, we promoted a UN General Assembly resolution last month ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day. It was on January 20th, the anniversary of the 1C conference, where 114 countries co-sponsored the resolution condemning Holocaust denial, and delegitimate Holocaust denial. I have to say on a personal note that I was disappointed that India was not one of those 114 co-sponsors. But they did. They were part of the consensus supporting the resolution. The Israeli embassy, together with Yad Vashem, has been working on helping Indian teachers to learn about the Holocaust, to incorporate it into their curricula in their various schools. Unfortunately, our capabilities and our capacity is not big enough for a country like India. We are working very hard together with Yad Vashem and various schools and education departments around the country in order to instill the Holocaust education into the curricula. But it's a huge project, and this is really something that we would be happy if other countries were to join us, or if India were to take it upon herself as a project that it would be more able to do in such a large scale. I know that time is short tonight, so I won't go into too much more. Both of the speakers mentioned the sale of Mein Kampf and of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in bookstands around India. This is something that since I've arrived here, it keeps shocking me every time I see it. I have to say it's not something I can get used to. This is also something that we've tried to have talks with various departments with, and if there's any way that as an embassy we could work somehow together to eliminate this phenomena of these two books being sold. Even on the street, you know, you have these boys selling piles of books on the street at the street lights, and you see right there in the middle Mein Kampf, which is just horrendous to me. So we are looking for ways to get it off the bookstalls and off of sales, because it's really something that when you have it without the context, especially. I mean, my husband is a scholar of fascism, and he has Mein Kampf also, but he studied it within the context of what it is. But when you have it just being sold as another light reading, it's incomprehensible, and it's something that really is a problem here, I believe. I do want to thank both of the speakers, and I want to thank the Austrian Cultural Center and the Austrian Embassy for their support. I can't help but remember when we tried to do this a couple of weeks ago, that we did have the horrible interruption of this broadcast, and I am thankful that we were able to carry on with this, and we did persist and produce this this production this time with no interruptions, due to the magic of technology that we were able to put to use and and prevent any unwelcome interruptions. I thank you for doing this. I thank you for helping to carry on the memory of the Holocaust and the fight against Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism. Thank you so much for doing this. I can't hear you.
Professor Pant, we can't hear you.
You can now. Thank you, Your Excellency. That was wonderful. I do hope, I also have been very disappointed with Mein Kampf circulating so widely, but I think it's not being circulated as light reading. It is a careful plan to promote it as a motivational, inspirational text. That is what is scary. And that is what I was referring to when I was putting my question to Professor Afridi. How do you do that in a country which says we are having freedom of expression for circulation of subversive text, poisonous text like this, but we have a government whose cultural organization and the support base takes inspiration from it there. So that is a problem which all Indians are facing. And I think, how do we talk of Holocaust and remember when we choose to erase our memories about our violations of the minority rights? And Parsis are a small minority, but the largest minority we have, the Muslims, are having a bad time for quite some time. And I think the Sikhs, who are a comparatively smaller minority, have had a taste of genocidal violence. So I think we have to worry about that ourselves. And I do very much hope, Your Excellency, that one day India has the courage to look inwards, have truth and reconciliation, not talk of revenge. And the process of healing will only start with this. So I thank you very much for your contribution. And I would like to pass on the mic to Professor Mr. Matthias Regniskovic, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, to wind up the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pushpesh. Thank you very much for all the participants. I have to say I was very, very, very much impressed. Of course, by everyone. It was extremely thought-provoking. I have to say, also from my side. Professor Müller-Funk talked about the difficulties of remembering, and also about the notion of collective guilt. And I have to say, I experienced this firsthand in my grandparents' generation. Experienced the Holocaust. Part of my family, not being Jews, but still part of my family died in the concentration camps because they were resisting to the Nazis. And I remember how difficult it was for my grandparents and also for my parents, who were born basically immediately after the war, to talk about this. It was, I had the impression that my grandparents, actually my grandfather was imprisoned and then had to hide in the forests for not being killed by the Nazis, etc. But they never wanted to talk about it. And looking back, I thought it would have been extremely interesting to me to talk with them about the topic, but I mean, they passed away when I was too small. But thinking back, I thought I would have liked to learn more about this, but I didn't, because it simply was not an issue. They wanted to forget, it seemed, what they had gone through. So they talked actually more. I mean, as I said, they were prosecuted by the Nazis. They put in concentration camps, were hiding, etc., etc. But they talked more about the Russian occupation that came afterwards than the atrocities they experienced under the Nazis. So that I found weird. So even coming from a family that had a history in some kind, this remembering is difficult. And for me now, as the third generation, most of the things I learned through school. So I feel for this difficulty of remembering, because, as I said, it was those who had experienced it had a hard time talking about this, even to your family, and you will know better than me, but there have been analyses why this is the case, why this is not being talked about. It's a psychological phenomenon, etc. I was also very impressed by Professor Fredi. I was not aware of this to this extent, of how Hitler is praised and becoming more and more idle in South Asia. I have to admit, I was not aware of this. So from that point of view, I failed. From my point of view, I failed to understand. I mean, you gave a lot of interesting explanations for this phenomenon, which we highly appreciate, and obviously we completely agree with the need to education and inform the people about it. This is also what we experienced some years ago when there was still a live Holocaust Day with students, Indian students, and they asked the question, but why was Hitler so bad actually? So obviously there was a huge lack of knowledge, and then we tried to explain, well, that's why he was so bad. But I remember these questions, why was he actually bad? Tell me. So there is a huge knowledge. I still somehow, coming from Europe, I mean, in the end, Hitler did not realize what he tried to achieve, right? I mean, Germany was defeated. There were a lot of Jews who survived, etc., etc. So why is he still kind of becoming an idol if he, I mean, didn't reach basically his personal targets? Luckily, we have to say. So there was a lot of interesting and thought-provoking messages, I think, from everyone. Thank you also very much for our Israeli colleague for participating. It's always very important also to, have the Israeli embassy on board, because it is an important day, and we need to remember it. And of course, we try to reach out. Again, I'm a bit sorry that we couldn't have an open debate with the audience, but it wasn't, we had to take precautionary measures for the second time. So I hope that didn't step too much. So in that case, I'm sorry that we have to wind up, because there's a lot going through my mind now with all you said, but I think the session has been long enough. So thank you very much for all the participants. It has been a great pleasure. And I hope we can redo it next year somehow. Manish, I'm counting on you, because I won't be around in India anymore. So thank you very much to all of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Radostich. And one last thing, or rather second last, which we totally forgot, or rather it's my fault. I really did not introduce Professor Pushpesh Pant's with his background.
No, good enough. Mr. Razovich said nothing. Mr. Matthias said a friend of the Austrian embassy. That's what is
Well, thank you very much in that case. And let's hope that, with this session, we open up new avenues where not only the school going, but the college going students and, others, they start getting some knowledge about the Holocaust and its the background and other things. In the meanwhile, what we have done is, we have a Thanksgiving sheet with us, which will give thanks to everyone, just to so that we have not missed anybody. And on that note, I thank each and everybody for participating second time, even though in a short period and a short span of this time.